Welcome back to My Career, My Calling, where we empower and build you up to live life on purpose, in purpose, for purpose. As you are aware, this program started in 2019 to create a space where we unpack the lived experiences and the realities of migrants, their stories of raw hardship, quiet resilience, and the triumph of overcoming systemic odds on their career journeys in their new home country, particularly here in Australia. Now, many migrants know that when people move across borders seeking safety, opportunity, or a better future, they expect society and its institutions to operate with basic integrity and fairness. But when migrants instead run into walls of racial discrimination, institutional racism, or inequitable treatment, the damage goes far deeper than mere inconvenience. It breaks trust. It wounds their sense of justice. It causes what some experts may call moral injury. Now, I am not an expert on the topic of moral injury, but today I am extremely delighted that as we are unpacking this profound topic, we have with us two of the world's most invested people on moral injury here with me to share on this topic. With me today, I have joining me live all the way from Ireland, Leo Quinlan, and from Melbourne, Australia, Marty O'Connor, founders of Moral Injury International. We'll be exploring what moral injury truly is, how it silently shapes the migrant journey, and how we can move from institutional betrayals to genuine healing and resilience. Ladies and gentlemen, wherever you are watching us from, please help me make welcome to My Career, My Calling, Marty O'Connor and Leo Quinlan. Marty and Leo, welcome to My Career, My Calling.
Dr. Stephanie, it's such an honor to be on your show. And thank you so much for having us on.
Absolutely. Thank you, Stephanie. Great to meet you, and thanks for the invitation.
Yes, thank you so much. And, I'm so pleased to have both of you here with me today. I had the privilege of sharing with Marty on the Moral Injury podcast a couple of weeks ago when I celebrated a milestone birthday. And I was really pleased to be able to learn of the great connections we have through our historical background. And yes, welcome to the My Career, My Calling platform. Marty, last time when we spoke, you shared how our Jamaican connection has a connection with the Irish background. You want to share that with our audience?
Yeah, I believe when we looked at it, and Leah would know, was because of the connection is 1 in every 3 Jamaicans have Irish connection somewhere down the line. And I think we were talking earlier off air, but you said something there, Doctor, about the actual language was similar.
Yes. When I was doing some research years ago, I actually found out that people believe that the Jamaican accent has a very strong Irish influence in our Jamaican English. So there you have it. But welcome to My Career, My Calling. And now, Marty and Leo, moral injury is something that many of us have probably never heard about, and it's a developing field. And I think it's really important for us to ground our conversation in to ground our conversation and have a clear definition of what moral injury for someone who is hearing this for the first time. And I want us to also explain how does it differ from the standard psychological trauma, PTSD, or workplace burnout. I think Leo, I'll pass that question to you.
Yes.
Oh, thank you, Stephanie. You introduced Marty and I as kind of experts on moral injury. I think Marty and I would be the first to say we're not absolute experts on it. We have a layman's knowledge of moral injury, mostly as a result of one particular incident. Marty and I share something. Both our fathers were in the army. Both our fathers fought in the same battle in the Congo in 1961. I myself was in the army after that for many years. And because of my army career, and as a veteran, I interact with the American Army, for example. And in 2020 and early 21, talking about this battle in the Congo in a place called 𝐦𝐢𝐿, the American officers I was speaking with, they say to me, you know, what the men in 𝐦𝐢𝐿 suffered, that's the perfect example of collective moral injury. That was the first time I ever heard the expression moral injury. I knew about PTSD and so on and so forth. So as I dug into it and as I learned from them, it's moral injury exists everywhere, not just in the army. It exists, as you pointed out, in immigrants, if I'm using the correct terminology. It exists in the police forces, prison services, churches, civil service, corporate sector, in every walk of life where there's interaction with people. But in simple terms, from a military point of view, and it's the same for everybody else, when soldiers suffer some traumatic experience and are then betrayed by higher authority, and the word betrayal is paramount in all of moral injury. And you used the term a few minutes ago, institutional betrayal. And the side effects of moral injury, basically soldiers or other people, they experience something, they observe something, they witness something, they do something that goes against their moral upbringing, against their family values, against their religious beliefs. They're forced to do something. Maybe in the case of an army, you know what I mean. But then the bad thing about it is that they are thrown on the scrap heap. They're denied afterwards no, what to call it, as Marty often says, duty of care to the soldiers when they come back or to their families. And then the side effects of moral injury is silence. People don't talk about it. They hide within themselves. They drink too much. They find it difficult to stay married or have relationships. They get depression, serious depression. Some that we know have ended up in mental homes. And unfortunately, we also know of some people who took their own lives as a result of living with moral injury for many, many years. But Marty and I know a lot about this from a layman's point of view. And I've tried to explain it in a layman's way. We know people who's my age now. They'll tell me when my father came home from the Congo, he never spoke blah, blah, blah. He never talked about the Congo. He'd go away in the back garden and he'd smoke for hours in the garden shed. My father never told me he loved me. I never got a hug from my dad when he came back. I know children of 𝐦𝐢𝐿 who are my age. They don't talk to each other. And then you have the transgenerational effect of it. And recently, somebody who's more academic than I am in relation to moral injury explained to me that it becomes part of the family DNA and it goes down through the generations. And I would hazard a guess that this type of DNA association of moral injury probably exists in immigrants also. And the Irish were immigrants, and the Irish were certainly betrayed, institutionally betrayed when they went to other countries as well. So in a long-winded way, I hope I've kind of indicated what Marty and I consider moral injury to be from a layman's term. And I hope that can start you off now, asking the right questions.
Thank you so much, Leo. That's pretty deep. And as you shared the definition, there are a few words that jumped out there for me. And one of them is the word betrayal. Betrayal is a very core part of the concept of moral injury. You know, it's
Absolutely.
so critical. Yeah. Marty, did you want to add anything?
No, I think the thing of betrayal, and if I can just jump in betrayal, because I was never in the army, but I understand moral injury. I learned through Leo, but the point is that there was, as Leo said earlier, is I always use the word there was no duty of care, but not
Yeah.
just for the person that is serving or the person that's going through that trauma or whatever happened, whatever the incident is that the fact is that there was no you always blamed yourself whatever had to happen, and that's not the way it should be. And then it goes down through the family, and they carry that on thinking, and I would use the word that they carry guilt.
Yeah.
They think that it was their fault. And if I may just jump in and bring on a little bit more, is like with my dad in the army and that, which this definitely is, they came home, then it was down to the parents, and I would say the wife or the partner, and it's transgenerational because what they suffer, it carries on. And I found moral injury, once you understand it, it is a cousin or relation of post-traumatic stress disorder, of course. And as Leo said, we're not medical or anything like that. So if you feel like that, you should get it done. But is that it will carry on until you finally understand. And I must use these words, which I've said on other podcasts, is with moral injury. Once you understand that, it gives you good relief. And what I mean by that, Dr. Stephanie, is it wasn't your fault. And you're going into immigrants, whether you had to leave your country and you had to survive somewhere else, that's not your fault. That was the circumstance.
Absolutely. And I really thank you for that addition as well, Marty, because myself as a first generational migrant, having that lived experience, coming to Australia as a PhD student back in 2009 and navigating just the whole journey of uprooting everything that was familiar, starting all the way from scratch again. It's not that you come and you collect what you came for and you go back. Even for that period of being a student, it's relearning, recalibrating the way you think in a new environment, and also just navigating the way systems are structured, navigating your own personal identity in that context. And I appreciate when you say, once you get to understand that all of this is part of the process and everything that comes out of that, it's really not your fault. It's part of the process that you have to go through. So no one should blame you for the adjustments and the actions and the things that you have to do to become part of a new environment. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you, Doctor. Yeah, don't blame yourself for what happened.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'll come back to this idea of the transgenerational effects, because I think this is a really important part of the understanding of moral injury, and particularly in Australia where we live. As you shared on that, I can see a lot of similarities in the system that we live in. But I wanted to just hang on to that to come back to it in a little bit. I wanted to actually hear a little bit more of your own experience, your personal experience with moral injury. I know you've touched a little bit on your own experience with your fathers and so on. Would you like to add anything else in terms of your own experience with moral injury that led you to have this passion to advocate for and to the point of forming the Moral Injury International? What motivated that?
Yeah, I think it was meeting Leo, but also I think with moral injury is that once you understand what it is, it takes that weight off your shoulder.
Yeah.
Now I go into the transgenerational, which obviously, as you know, but I'll say this for your first time listeners, is that led when someone has a post-traumatic stress or a setback and there's no duty of care. Well, that led my mom, which is, I say that quite openly, is led her to attempted murder-suicide on us children 6 times. Now, that is not her fault. That's the fault that they didn't understand back then. I know it's getting better now, and even the show you're doing here, people speak about it. So transgeneration is where you can't, as Leo alluded to at the start, you can't make commitment. You don't, as he said, you're not told you're loved, whatever but from my personal, it took a weight off my shoulder understanding it, as in what it is. And I'm sorry, I'm alluding back to is it was not my fault. And I was blessed that I asked my mom before she passed. I said, Mom, Ma, we called him back home. I said, Ma, were you trying to kill us because we were 6 little, and I won't use the words, 6 little buggers? And she said, no, I loved you, but I couldn't leave you. And again, that goes back to what we're saying about moral injury, what Leah was saying about is no matter what religion you are, it's an injury to the soul, and you have to carry that.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is really, truly profound. Leo, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, Marty and I've discussed this many times, and people who came in our situation, who came back from the Congo, various people suffered from moral injury collectively, as I've mentioned earlier, but they all suffered to a different degree. I would say that my father, for example, suffered it, but not to the same degree, let's say, as Marty's father. I'm just hazarding that guess in that case, a fairly reasonably accurate guess, I think. So some people probably didn't suffer at all. It all depends on the individual. But the problem is that there was a lot of suffering and still suffering, and it's gone down to the 3rd generation now, because I meet people in that 3rd generation, young people in their 20s, who say, my granddad was there, and the family are all screwed up. Why? And it's only since moral injury has become known in Ireland in 2021 that people are now beginning to realize why. The thing about it, Marty mentioned that when people begin to understand moral injuries, the penny drops. Say, oh, now I know why my father was like this. Or now I know why my granddad. Or now I know why the silence has been there for years. And that silence, just to give you one example, there was a young man in Jadaville. I know him. He's now 82 years of age. He was 17 years of age in Jadaville, and he did some amazing things. And I know him, and I know his beautiful wife, and they are really a lovely, lovely couple. And there was a talk being given. I was giving a talk 2 years ago in a certain place, and he was the guest of honor. And the local community knew nothing about him other than he was an absolute wonderful gentleman with a lovely, lovely wife. His son of 54 years of age came to that meeting. He came over from England. And at 54 years of age, it was the first time he ever heard of his father's experiences, because the father never spoke about it all during the 54 years that this young man was born. So they hide things, they hold it inside them. They don't talk about it until maybe near the end of life, or when something traumatic or traumatic happens. Or in the case of the Jadaville thing, is when the film came out and books were written, and then older people started saying, yeah, now I understand, now I'd like to talk about it. And all of a sudden, their families learn things that they've hidden for years and years. That's just some of the side effects of moral injury. And I imagine it's the same in prison officers, police, people that Marty and I have interviewed. It's exactly the same. It doesn't matter what walk of life. Private sector, for example, a family situation, a car crash, some horrific incident that people see, experience, observe, or hear about, or it can have this moral injury effect. A moral injury is something that you hide inside. It's not easy to measure it. You can, post-traumatic stress, they say that you can measure it, you can help it, you can cure it, etc. But in the moral injury case, people don't always talk about it. You don't know that person is suffering from it. And, you know, it has to be spoken about, and you have to chat. And then, as Marty and I've discovered, all of a sudden, to say, now I understand. Now I can forgive what happened because I understand it wasn't that person's fault. They suffered something, they ended up with moral injury, they became changed people. And as years go on, it affected the family right down. And I love the expression that DNA got into the family and it continues in the family. Anyway, I'm rabbiting on a bit too much.
Can I just jump in there for a sec? Is also, Doctor, is we're just talking about that immigrants and that now. I would put moral injury. We're talking about the army context. We're talking about police, first responders. But believe me, and I know this for a fact, is how a partner, how a child can go through moral injury and carry it on their life. You know, what experience or what trauma that they lived with. And I see that, and with, thank God nowadays, but the way women were treated back then, you know, they were felt worthless, which is part of putting someone down moral injury. But I would say for the transgenerational, it's about education, educating them, because I only realized this. And when, as Leo said, but when I realized that moral injury was, it took a weight off my shoulder. And alluding back to what you said, that's why I started doing this. And Leo and myself, as you've been on our show, we've been doing this for 6 years, both shows, Life Stories at Marty and Moral Injury. It's the best non-paying job we ever had.
That's amazing. Absolutely amazing. Sorry,
but
Leo,
Stephanie,
were you saying something?
Sorry, Stephanie, if I can mention that it's quite amazing the way the term moral injury is going everywhere. The awareness of moral injury is rising all the time. And it is giving some, as Marty said, relief to people, the understanding to people, getting rid of the so-called shame that they think they have and they shouldn't have. So we're very, very, very happy that we've done our little bit in raising the awareness of moral injury. And that's our only mission, is to raise the awareness of moral injury so that people who are better qualified than Marty and I can then tackle it in a medical way or whatever way, a psychological way or a psychiatric way. I don't know. We don't say that we're good at that, but we
and Dr. Stephanie,
awareness.
can I just say there, sorry, Leo. Yeah, you gone. You cut me off. Leo, can I say is Nikki Jameson, who has Moral Injury Australia, we did have it. Now, up in Western Australia now, or South Australia, is now when they go to a specialist and you've got post-traumatic stress, you know, they go to the psychologist and they tick the box, post-traumatic stress, it looks like. Now, which is coming down here and hopefully all over, is there's 2 boxes: moral injury or post-traumatic stress. And that's what the difference is. And what you do, Dr. Stephanie, what you do is, even on your podcast, is, and in the Jamaican and the community, and my God, you've got one hell of a voice. And people can listen on my podcast, Life Stories at Marty, and listen to Stephanie's full one. But it's bringing people together. And we've always said this, Leo, is moral injury can be solved. It doesn't matter what it is don't let someone sit in the corner. Talk to them. You know, sit and just let them talk, because men are a bit stupid. They don't talk so much. Do you know what I mean? Hey, look, I've got references, my ex-wife, but that's what's important.
Amen.
Wonderful. This is really powerful, and I hope that our listeners are really taking some notes, because what we can see and hear here is that moral injury does transcend generations. It transcends borders. It transcends social status. moral injury is definitely not selective. And I'm just listening to the conversations and just understanding that, once you understand how moral injury plays out, then you can actually disentangle that web that you can often feel caught into when you feel like it's your fault or it's your parents' fault or the ancestors' fault. And there's so much coming in. But as you were speaking, there are a few things that came to mind because some of my work, my academic work here, um, another one of my many hats, Marty. Um, I've been doing some work looking at migrants and particularly in terms of international students. And I recently sat down with a very large group. We're looking at some of the institutional experiences of migrant students. And with a group of international students recently as part of a research project that I'm leading, and they spoke about the experiences studying in Australia. And it was quite sad in some ways when I heard them speak about how they had to fork out so much money to pay for their visas, and how the fees would just be hiked up like almost overnight. And and they were thinking, we have to work to pay the fees. They still have family back home and so on and so forth. But one thing that someone said that really stood out for me was, when I asked them, how do you cope with that? They said, look, we we pay the money because we want to complete our studies. There's something we need, and the country also knows that we need it. So they will hike the prices up, and they know we are going to pay it because we want what they have. So it was this vicious cycle that, you know, we know that what's happening to us is not good, but because we want it so bad, we are willing to pay the price. And why I'm raising this is because as you were speaking, there's a lot of mental and emotional trauma that these students experience. And it's similar, not just to the students, but also to professionals who move internationally to work. And as you know, our podcast serves a very broad professional audience as well. But here we are seeing that people go through these traumatic experiences and they are willing to pay the price because of what they need. And what I'd love for us to kind of look at is how this journey can translate into the migrant slash international student journey and their encounters with sometimes, the racial discrimination, the institutional racism, and how that really impacts on their lives. I don't know if you've had anyone that you've encountered in your journey in advocating for understanding on moral injury, but I'd love to hear what your experiences has been like
I'm going to put Leo on to answer that, but what I would say is that sometimes, even as you move from a young girl and people, young boys in Jaredville, that is, and the same with myself, you develop and you don't realize later that the survival is built in your DNA. And survival is getting through the moral injury. But Lee, I'm going to hand that over to you.
Yeah, Marty always does this, hands me the sticky ones. Stephanie, what you're saying there, the migrant end of things and so on and so forth. I mean, the Irish have experienced all of that, as you probably know better than I, history-wise. I think I could be wrong about the dates, but way back hundreds of years ago, I mean, the first slaves sent to the East Indies were Irish, way before the Africans were sent there. So we have that history. And that's why, as you said, in Jamaica, you have Irish accents coming out every now and again. But I suppose you used an expression earlier on institutional betrayal. I think this is probably the key to everything. that you're experiencing, whether you're a former soldier or a police officer or a migrant, immigrant, or whatever. The fact that the institutions that you're supposed to depend upon, they betray you by asking for excessive fees, by treating you badly, by making you accept lesser standards than other people, their own people, for example. You know, if you concentrate on institutional betrayal, in every single one of us in every walk of life have experienced institutional betrayal at some stage. And that's a terrible, terrible fact to have to live with. And it's all over the world in every life sector, in every occupation. I've seen it. I've traveled an awful lot. I've worked in over 50 countries, and I've seen it everywhere. Sorry, I don't know if that actually answers the question.
Yes, absolutely. And so it's not an Australian problem. It's not an Ireland problem. It's not a Jamaican problem. It's something that is everywhere, and people experience this regardless of where that new country might be or that new tour of duty may end up being. And just to continue on that thread, you know, we see the neglect, the inequity, sometimes the biases, even in the critical essential services. And I'm not going to even touch on COVID because I played a very significant role in 3 different continents during COVID. But we've seen how these things can inflict that moral injury in people who use the system. And I'd love to come back to this concept of the transgenerational impact, because what we are actually dealing with currently is the children who are coming out of those relationships.
Yeah.
Right. The children of the migrants, the children of the military personnel, the children of the people who've gone through that are the ones who are now carrying the bigger part of the burden, because they've grown up with that lack of interaction, the lack of communication, maybe the lack of empathy. You know, the children who are coming out of the broken homes and the you know, from the suffering. How can we understand what this transgenerational impact is, and how do we then look at making sure that these families, especially that in second generation, understands, you know, the way you've spoken about it is, once you understand, then the forgiveness can happen. You can start the process of healing. But for the child who grows up in a family not understanding why my dad didn't show me love, or why did my parents separate, or why was it that my mom found my dad intolerable to the point where they had to break up? How do we help to translate that message for them and to help them understand the whole concept of moral injury?
Yes. Can I jump in?
Absolutely. Go ahead. Go for it.
Excellent question.
Excellent. Well, I think actually it's very easy to understand. Marty and I have discovered that almost when we speak to people or interview people, the first time they hear about moral injury, all of a sudden, as we term it, the penny drops. I mean, in the first conversation you'd have, in the first half hour, the penny drops. Oh my God, I never knew about this. Oh my God, that's exactly my father. That's exactly my family. That's exactly my brother. The penny drops. So understanding that moral injury exists is easy enough. I think intellectually and instinctively people understand it. And they said, oh my God, you know, and Marty has referred to a couple of times, a weight is lifted off your shoulders once you understand it. Then how to, let's say, survive it after that, it varies from various people depending on what they want to say. Do they continue to hide it? Do they approach people? Do they talk? Do they get, let's say, some inner strength that helps them to forgive the person that caused them grief over their years growing up because that person suffered from oral injury and they never knew about it. But I think it can be easier to understand and easier to be cured, for the want of a better expression, than people realize. That's my own opinion. My own opinion.
May I say that I would
Go
use
ahead.
this phrase that you watch your children grow up, but they watch you grow up. And everything that relates to that as the transgenerational. You know, you see someone doing something, and that's what you realize, going back, forgive me, but alluding back to is it was not your fault. And it's the same with I look after domestic violent dogs and that, and my mom went through that. Is do not blame yourself. It is not your fault. And one of the things about moral injury is don't live in silence. Right? And no matter what situation you're in, Leah was talking about the army, we're talking about police, we're talking about nurses, we've had all of those on, but also within the family, do not tolerate, and I'll use my mom's words now, and I know a bit about it, is, you know, words can be more, or if not the same, hurtful than the fist, you know, or a beaten up. So you have to be very careful with your words while you use them, and that will make an impact because people remember words.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's so powerful.
Stephanie, if I may, Stephanie, while it's in my mind, the transgenerational effect. Marty and I've interviewed lots of people, but just some things come to mind. I mean, when you get people who are in their 50s, 60s, 70s, highly educated, professors, doctors, etc., who come from families who suffered from moral injury, and I know them in Ireland, etc., and the children haven't spoken in 50 years to each other. Brothers and sisters, since their early teens, they haven't spoken to each other. That's tragic. And why? Because the father suffered from moral injury from an experience that he was involved in. And they never had the opportunity to figure it out. No duty of care, betrayal by higher authorities. And their children don't know their first cousins. I know families who said to hell with this, and they emigrated to the UK, emigrated to Canada, just to get away from the family. And that's a tragedy. That's a tragedy. I'm lucky that didn't happen in our family. Our dad was a very strong man and so on and so forth, and we never suffered to the degree other people suffered. You know, the family is so important. Sorry, I'm rambling a little bit, but I just wanted to get that point across.
I would say, Dr. Steph, I would say is that people, whatever age, just remember it's not your fault. As I would go in, as I said earlier, my mom attempted murder-suicide. We all thought it was our fault. And I asked my mother at the end, before she passed, and I said, why were you trying to take our lives? Was there something wrong with us? Where it wasn't wrong with us, it was wrong with Leona's story, and my story's coming out, you know, too. But I asked my mom, why did you stay with my dad? You know, and I'm talking about army context and being overseas. And she said, she goes, I loved him, but they sent the wrong man home.
Wow,
Yeah.
that is so deep and so profound. And there's just so much in that we could unpack. But, you know, we don't have the time to do it. But it's really an important, it's such an important perspective. And as you said that, it reminds me, so there's another project that I'm working on with migrant families. And with these migrant families, what we see is the children So whether these children are from refugee backgrounds or professional families like myself who have come to Australia for work or whatever the circumstances is that brought them here, the why we came actually is not so important, but the experience. What we've observed is that the first generation children there's this dissonance, there's this challenge to communicate with the family members, right? And what we've seen is major communication challenges, which kind of connects to what both you and Leo mentioned around, the difficulty and the ability to communicate to the point where some people move away and so on. And I'd love to get your perspective in when I speak to parents like those, or because the parents are usually beside themselves. They don't know how to communicate because they're also navigating all the transitions, dealing with these new institutional systems that they find uncomfortable, while at the same time trying to create a stable home for their children. What are some of what is a key message that we could actually give to parents who are experiencing this kind of pressure of integrating in the new country, and then their children were all country as a new home, and they are finding this conflict between, into the traditions, the customs, the cultures that they're trying to preserve. How do we advise those parents in terms of navigating the space?
I'm going to hand it over to Leah, but I would say, just to throw my in there, is I would think is community. And it's like going back to moral injury that we're talking about is, and I've said before, and I'll say it many times, men are stupid. They don't talk about things. If you keep it in silence, you're never going to get anywhere. And I think the community by talking, and I think Dr. Stephanie is what you're doing, opening that door. And again, I'll finish on that and let cross over to Leo, is education about this.
Yeah. Just a thought occurs to me in this case, Stephanie. When people go into different countries, emigration, etc., immigrants and emigrants, they're going through what is called cultural change, trying to fit into another culture. And totally apart from moral injury or anything else, I know from my HR side, because I used to be an advisor to different governments around the world in this area, as well as a few other things. Cultural change is one of the hardest experiences to go through. It can take a whole generation. And it doesn't necessarily mean anybody is suffering from moral injury or whatever. But then the added thing, it's very insidious. If they're made to feel by the powers that be that they're inferior in any way, or if they're looked down upon because of whatever reason, skin color, religion, whatever, that's added to the cultural change factor. And you can't dismiss how difficult cultural change is. If you want to make a change in an existing, let's say, bank or an existing company, cultural change, moving people from one area to another area, the whole thing can collapse. Unions can come in, it destroys communities, it destroys the workforce. I know this from experience. So we shouldn't get mixed up between the difficulty of cultural change, even when everything is nice and perfect, and moral injury. But if you have a combination of cultural change and then being betrayed by the people that are supposed to be helping you make that change, and the colleges or the schools or the government or the funding or whatever it is, well, then the whole thing comes together, and it's not a nice mixture at all. I just throw that out for consideration.
Thank you so much. And I think that really needed to be said. Yes. Not every challenge related to cultural change is moral injury. But for many people, they've actually had that lived experience of the betrayal, the undermining that because of the extra vulnerability created by the cultural change, it can actually make them vulnerable for the moral injury. And
Correct.
I think as we are bringing this home, I want to talk about what does moral repair look like then in this context? How do we, we spoke about the importance of understanding what the moral injury is, or to be able to recognize it for what it is. Secondly, once you understand, then you can come to terms with it. What's that process looks like when you're, how do we help to bring the repair to the injury that has been created? Both for the older generation and the next generation who is experiencing that transgenerational impact.
I'm going to hand it over to Leah, but I would say from just my couple of words is understanding what moral injury is, then doesn't hit you in the face. I wish I had learned this at school. But Leah, I'll cross over to you to answer that question, please.
No, it's obviously just to talk about it. Marty mentioned community. Get the community to help each other. If you talk about it and the penny drops and people understand, now I know. And I shouldn't be ashamed of myself. Just because of my religion, my race, or my educational situation, or whatever, I shouldn't be ashamed. And the word shame is very, very important, because I don't fully agree that people who suffer from moral injury are ashamed of something. Now, other people have said it, it's there, but it's not as strong as they think, in my opinion. But I do remember a veteran of this battle in the Congo, when he was about 90 years old or 88 years old or something like that, at a funeral of another veteran. The topic came up, what should you do? And he made a very strong point. Look, we have nothing to be ashamed of. We did what we had to do. Why should we be ashamed? And that was the first time I heard anybody using the word shame in relation to this. And, so it's a very insidious thing. And the betrayal factor, we're betrayed, so we should be ashamed. You think that you've done something wrong when you haven't. So I just like to emphasize that people should not be ashamed, and to look a bit deeper at the causes, and people who are trying to help others, make sure that they know you've nothing to be ashamed of. You didn't do anything wrong. You suffered something, but it's not your fault, as Marty has said. So I don't know. It might help.
And Dr. Stephanie, can I just chuck in a word that Leah triggered in my head there is, obviously there was a lot of violence in my house and Mama got beaten up, but as I've talked to people, I find that people have to be, you're talking about moral injury, but words can be as hurtful as the fist, without being blunt about it, and especially with women, or partners, it's not your fault what happened. And you have to let that go and talk about it. That's what I'd sign off on with moral injury.
Amen.
This is amazing, but I can't let you go without sneaking one last one in. Marty, Leo, as you know, I'm a woman of the cloth. I'm a very strong believer in Christ, and I follow the Christian faith. And one of the critical things that you've spoken about today is betrayal. A lot of this starts with the inherent betrayal that's connected with it. And I wondered, what's the role of forgiveness in this moral repair? What would you say in terms of that? Because that's something that is very much at the core of the Christian faith. But beyond even faith, where does forgiveness come into all of this?
I can a quick answer, if I may, Marty, jump in. Marty has mentioned it before. When you understand why the person who, let's say, harmed you, forget about the institutional betrayal, but why the person who harmed you that person is suffering from moral injury, say, now I understand. Now I understand my brother. Now I understand my father. Now I can forgive him. Because the understanding, it wasn't his fault. He suffered. He suffered more than maybe we suffered because it was all inside him. And he suffered for whatever, shame, disappointment, anger, etc., etc., etc. So once you understand it, then forgiveness can be sent his way. That's my layman's way of looking at it.
The thing is, Dr. Stephanie, is that we're talking here about the moral injury of that, but it's not the person that, as Dale said before, it's not the person that's inflicted on. It's not, it brings it home. And if I may say, you know, we as kids and in different form, but I know a lot of people, you never knew who was walking in the front door, you know, and I really believe that if, and I'm saying this on your show, is that you have to believe what you're doing is right. And men, in particular, or partners, should not put someone down with words. You know, it is hurtful. And then it carries on because, as I always said, the kids, I said earlier, is, you know, the kids watch you growing up. You watch your kids growing up, but they watch you growing up, and it's just not right in that way. But it's a great, moral injury is a great, it's a better than a pill. I'll put it like that. And I'm not qualified to say that.
You mean the understanding of moral injury, Marty, isn't it?
Correct. That's right. Thank you for covering for me, Leo.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I just wanted to be sure.
Absolutely wonderful conversation here. I'd love to get one final word from you. If someone from, you know, organizations in Australia that interact with people who are experiencing moral injury, whether they were born and raised here in Australia or like many of us as migrants oftentimes see the symptoms of that moral injury through the inherent betrayal that we can often experience through the systems and the processes that we encounter. What's a final word in terms of what can institutions do to make a difference in helping people to manage and recover from moral injury?
Well, I think it's what you're doing by doing shows like you're doing and promoting it out there and educating young people. And if I may chuck in moral injury, please, for your audience, is remember that also goes to sexual abuse, where girls don't want to talk about, or sexual abuse within the workplace or within domestic. You need to talk to people about it. And I think what we do on moral injuries, just not telling anyone what to do or prescribing a pill, is basically just telling them, talk to us, and setting up groups. And look, Dr. Stephanie, your podcast is magnificent because you're talking and spread the word all around. And I just say I've always said there's moral injury, but you don't have moral injury. You can have 5%, 10%, 15%, 20%, 100%. So it's not, but just keep in mind, it's not your fault. It's just understanding it. Anyway, that's my mouth off there.
Thank you.
I think,
final
Stephanie,
words, Leo?
There needs to be, first of all, an institutional understanding of moral injury at the highest level, because they know about post-traumatic stress and other things, and they have doctors looking after it and so on. But I don't think yet they've taken moral injury, put that up there as one of the, for the want of a better word, one of the diseases or the illnesses. That has to be institutionally recognized as a medical situation and learn how to deal with it. That's very, very important. And then people in the army, in the police, in industry, in hospital, and so on, at management level, they should become aware of the existence of moral injuries. It should be trained as part of their induction, as part of their management training skills, as they are doing it, let's say, in armies now, to watch their staff to see if any staff member might be suffering from moral injury, or for the staff to understand what moral injury is in every walk of life, so that they can say, that person is suffering, or this boss is doing something that's going to end up with a moral injury among the staff or something. There has to become a greater awareness at higher level and institutional level and training level of moral injury for it to spread out and help people.
And I think Leo, that's what Dr. Stephanie is. I'd use the word, it's educational in advance, pre-dawn rather than after the fact. You can stop moral injury before they get to that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Wow, what a great conversation we've had here today. I want to, Leo and Marty, I want to say a huge thank you for coming along today and help me with this conversation on moral injury. As I mentioned, this, for many of us, even in the health professionals field, it's a new theme for us. It's a very unfamiliar topic to many health professionals. And it's great that we have the opportunity here on My Career, My Calling to get a deeper understanding of what moral injury is and how that manifests in people, how we, what the symptoms are and how it can impact anyone from any walk of life. And just to summarize for our audience, we've looked at the underlying key impact of that betrayal that starts it. And as we said at the end there, it's really important that we not just understand what it is, but we must be able to recognize it and to be able to have the right systems and processes, the resources, the training and the capacity building to help our institutions identify moral injury and to be able to stop it before it occurs, even in our organizations and our systems. And, for many of us as migrants, we've either experienced or encountered this on our journey. And as our guests have mentioned today, there are some critical things that we can do to help repair, which is have that deep understanding, teach this to our children, talk about it, make sure we are talking about it, help each other to get the conversation going, to experience the understanding of what happened and how we can accept that we were not at fault or you're not at fault. Don't be ashamed. Words can be hurtful, but it's not your fault. It's important to let it go. And there is a significant amount of room for forgiveness so we can move on and help the next generation from experiencing that transgenerational trauma or intercept that before it goes to the next generation. Yes. Marty and Leo, I cannot thank you enough for joining me here today.
It's been an honor to be on with you. You're a beautiful woman. And again, as we said, this is great educational. And thank you so much for having us on.
Thank you indeed, Stephanie. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much for your time as well. And I know our listeners may have questions, so we will put a link in the comments for our listeners to be able to reach out to Moral Injury International. There might be some people who actually would love to talk about their own experiences. I want to let you know that Marty O'Connor and Leo, Marty runs a Moral Injury podcast. If you'd love to share your own story and to help get it out, talk about it, I'm sure Marty would love to hear from you. So,
well, I'll put it like this, Stephanie. Leo and myself are available all the time. Anyone has a story on it. And I have to congratulate you on your new appointment. And I'm sure you'll be spreading the word out there. So thank you so much for having us on, Stephanie.
Thank you to both Leo and Marty. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's all from us for this episode of My Career, My Calling. And I'm pretty sure I will see you in the next series coming up. Until then, take care, and I'll see you on the next podcast.